name is Stephanie Borat. Welcome. We're glad you are here. We are recording the lecture and we are live on Facebook. So for anyone who hasn't been with us just yet, wanted to give you those two little heads up. We are going to add a couple of links in the chat so that if you'd like to sign up for our email or otherwise stay in touch with us, please check out those links in a little minute and have what you need at your fingertips. Okay, one last housekeeping thing before we get going. We'll keep everyone on mute during the talk, but if you do have a question, feel free to, you can ask it in the chat to everyone, or you can select my name and send it straight to me. I will ask that question at the end for John, or you can just wait to the end. We will have a minute or two for Q&A, and you can just unmute your microphone and ask your question then. So, okay, John Carpenter is our speaker today for Little Lunch Lectures. John has been with the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission since 2010 and is currently the Eastern Land Bird Biologist with the Wildlife Diversity Program. Among other initiatives, John administers the statewide Safe Harbor program that helps private landowners manage their habitats for the red-cockaded woodpecker, which is what he is here to talk about with us today. Van, if you would, can you post another link in the chat? This is about the Wildlife Diversity Program that John works on. So the link will be in the chat. You can click it and read a little bit more about that at another time. But in the meantime, we are excited to hear about red-cockaded woodpeckers. John, over to you.
You can still hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie, and thank you to the Coastal Land Trust for offering me the opportunity to share some information about the red-cockaded woodpecker, or as I'll oftentimes refer to it today, the RCW. For those that know nothing about red-cockaded woodpeckers, I think you'll learn a lot today. And for those that are already familiar with it, I'm still hopeful that you'll be able to walk away with at least a few pieces of new information. So to begin, I'm just going to kind of outline my talk very quickly. I'm going to start with a description of what RCWs look like and point out a few other woodpecker species that they can be commonly confused with. I'll next describe a few key attributes about their life history that makes them so unique. I'll review their current distribution and population estimates across the range, as well as here in North Carolina. And then kind of wrap things up with highlighting a cooperative project between the Commission and the Coastal Land Trust. So here they are. This is red-cockaded woodpecker. As the name suggests, and in this photo up here, this is where they get the red cockade from. It's a little tuft of red feathers, just kind of behind their ear or behind their eye. This is almost impossible to see in the field. But this picture is cropped out, so you can't see that a person is actually holding this bird that's probably agitating this individual, this male. And so he's kind of displaying those feathers, but otherwise it'd be very difficult to see. Something that is more prominent is on the left here, this white cheek patch. That's very diagnostic for them, something you could see in the field much more easily. And lastly, is this black and white barring on their back. Kind of looks like a ladder, this sort of staggered black and white pattern on the feathers. So the first couple species that I think are probably most easily confused with them just by appearance are the downy and hairy woodpeckers. This is a great photo of them on the right, sort of both perched at a feeder. You don't usually see them this close together, but in this situation, you can see the obvious differences in size. A red-cockaded woodpecker is intermediate between them in size. Downy on the left, hairy on the right there. Downies are more common than all three species. You can find them in many types of habitats, even in your own backyard. Neither the hairy or downy have that white cheek patch or the black and white barring on their back. You can let me see if I can get my pointer up. You can see they have some kind of barring on their feathers, but not really on their back. Both of the birds have a red patch on their head, similar to the red-cockaded woodpecker, but it's much more noticeable all the time, and it's larger and a little bit higher up on the back of the head. The next species is the pileated woodpecker. This is also fairly common in our area and across North America. I think what causes people to get confused with these two is the name red in the red-cockaded woodpecker's name. People automatically think they're going to see a lot of red. So when they see a pileated, they know it's a woodpecker. They see this big red crest, they think, oh, I've got a red-cockaded. But as you can see here, the comparisons they are quite different. Pileated is much larger. It's about the size of a crow, and again, just this big red crest of red feathers on its head should help you distinguish those from the RCW. So I'm gonna give you all a little pop quiz here. I know you're probably thinking, what's this guy doing, giving us a quiz on a Friday? But it'll be easy and quick. So I'm gonna show you a couple pictures of birds, and I guess you can use the chat feature, or just kind of play at home enough that you don't have to do anything if you don't want. So we'll start here with this one, and I'll just give you kind of a few seconds to think about it or cast your vote if you think this is an RCW. All right, so this is not an RCW. This is actually called a yellow-bellied sapsucker. It's got a lot of red here on the front and top of its head and the chin. No white cheek patch and no barring on its back. Another thing that's kind of interesting about the species, the sapsucker, that would kind of indicate its presence is they have this habit of kind of drilling these holes, this kind of linear, almost machine gun-like pattern in the bole of the tree. So if you happen to see that on a tree as you're kind of walking through the woods, you'd know that a sapsucker had been in that area at some point. And here's photo number 2. So is this an RCW? And for this one, yes, this is an RCW. It's got the obvious kind of white cheek patch. It's got that barring. This is somewhat of a kind of a trick question because this is actually a juvenile. It does have a red spot on its head, but it's farther up on the very top of its head. This is the young males have these feathers out of the nest, and they molt them usually in the fall or their first winter, and they'll lose those and then develop the red patch kind of behind the ear as they mature. Okay, so moving on, a couple quick facts about RCWs. They are endemic to North America and southeastern United States. 75% of their diet consists of arthropods. That's mostly beetles. So I described earlier that males and females, I think I'd said this, maybe I hadn't, but I'll just clarify that males and females, it's almost impossible to distinguish them apart from one another just based on visual cues as far as their plumage and characteristics, unless you can happen to see that little tuft red feathers, which is difficult. But one way you can do it, and this is not a guarantee, but there has been some evidence and studies done to support this, is that you can distinguish the sexes based on where they are foraging. So males have longer toes and shorter tails, which is advantageous for them to be foraging more on smaller branches and feeding there, whereas females have shorter toes and longer tails, which kind of helps prop them up on the bole of the tree. Their genus was recently changed from Pacoides to Dryobates. I'm sure if I'm saying these right, if anybody knows, and call me out on it. But that's kind of a big deal when you see something like that happen. The downy and hairy woodpeckers also experience the same change. And I believe a few woodpeckers out, I think in the western US, were the ones that retained the Bocoides genus. And RCW is what we call, and actually all woodpeckers for that matter, are primary excavators. So they're the ones that create a cavity, they hollow it out of a tree and live in it. And this is used by many other types of animals, insects, reptiles, amphibians, other birds, of course, and even mammals will use them, like flying squirrels will oftentimes usurp a cavity. So why is the RCW so unique? So there's, what I see is two kind of main things that make them so unique. The first is that they're the only woodpecker that excavates their cavity in a living pine tree. The pileated and hairy woodpecker can excavate their cavity in a living tree. It's rare for them to do that. They prefer something that's dead, but if they are going to do it, it's always going to be in a hardwood tree. So RCWs are the only ones that do it in a living pine tree. And second, there are only a handful of species that utilize a social system referred to as cooperative breeding or group living, whereby a family of birds occupy a territory. So I'm going to kind of step through these kind of individually a little bit more. There are a lot of things that are unique about their choice of a living pine tree, but there's two in particular. First, their preference is towards longleaf pine, and this is mostly because this tree species produces a lot of sticky sap. And from the tree's perspective, this offers them protection from things such as beetle outbreaks. And from the RCW's perspective, it offers them protection from predators such as rat snakes from being able to climb up a tree and get into their cavity. Secondly, they seek out older trees. This is for a couple of reasons. The older a tree is, the more likely it is to have a fungal infection, particularly a red heart fungus. This softens the heartwood and just makes it easier for them to kind of carve out their cavity. And it has been shown through studies that stands that have older trees that are well spaced from one another have higher abundance of biomass of arthropods, so food for them to eat. Some work done in North Carolina to determine how long it takes for them to actually excavate one of these cavities found that in a loblolly pine it can take anywhere from 6 to 9 years, and in a longleaf 10 to 13 years. So I can't think of anything that I've done for 10 to 13 years and was actually able to finish it. I'm still trying to clean out my shed for the last 3 years. I'm about to give up on it. So for me, that's pretty remarkable that they're able to be able to stick with it for that long. And that's kind of a range. I think there are birds that can do it a little bit quicker. It depends on the size of the tree, how much sapwood and heartwood they have to go through, if it's got the fungus, just how determined the bird is. They can maybe come in at the much lower end, 1 or 2 years, and then there are some birds that just are never able to finish either. But on average, this is how long it takes them to do it. So what does one of these cavities look like? One of the first things you may see as you're kind of passing through is the steady stream of sap kind of pouring down from the entrance of the cavity. As you get closer, you'll see that they have kind of formed this almost perfect circle. And this is a picture of what we call a start. So they haven't actually gone through and gotten to the heartwood yet. They're just starting out, but it's an almost perfect round circle. If something like a pileated woodpecker were doing this, they would be much more jagged and just sort of aggressive looking. The red-cockaded woodpecker are very much more specific and exact with their creation of this. As the sort of excavation of their work continues on the tree, they'll start pecking these resin wells, what we call them, around the opening. And sorry, let me try and get my laser pointer back. And so these resin wells are kind of up along the bole of the tree. This allows this, fresh sticky sap to flow down and help with protection. They'll also use their beak to kind of fleck away the outer brownish bark and reveal this sort of more bright red inner bark. And as the tree gets much older and is used much, much more, a bird will actually peck away so much that it'll form this plate where they've essentially removed all of the outer bark, and it's just kind of almost a smooth surface they've created there. So those are the main primary characteristics that you would see for a woodpecker cavity. A lot of people wonder, well, how tall are they? Are they built? On average, about 15 to 20 feet. But I've personally seen them as low as 4 feet and have been told they can get anywhere up to 90 feet high. A lot of that just depends on kind of the surrounding habitat. Okay, so one more little pop quiz here for you. I'm going to see if you all can decide if this, in fact, is an RCW cavity tree. So again, I'll give you a little bit of time to think about it. Okay, so let's kind of step through this a little bit based on some of the things we just learned about. So is it have a almost a perfectly round opening? And I'd say that, yeah, that looks pretty round to me. Is it 15 to 20 feet high? Well, this picture, I don't know. It's not very good. That'd be hard to tell, but let's just say, sure, that's 15 to 20 feet high. So far, so good. Do we see any kind of that reddish underbark that has been exposed by the bird flaking away at it? I would say no for that one. Has there been any resin wells with sort of sap dripping down from it? No for that. And finally, is it a living pine tree? I don't think this is a pine tree at all. So that's a no as well. So I think based on those, especially those last three, this would not be considered an RCW cavity. So congratulations to everybody. You're now all officially certified to be able to identify an RCW and one of their cavities. And if you happen to see, well, especially a cavity where you don't think there should be one or that we would know about, please, by all means, let me know about that. Okay, so far the emphasis has been more on sort of a single tree selection, but equally important is a group of nearby cavity trees that collectively amount to what we call a cluster. And an RCW cluster or group consists typically of a male and female and one or more helpers. Now, their trees are usually found close together, like we see here in this photo. The trees with sort of that white painted band around them are the cavity trees. The birds, a group of woodpeckers requires, on average, about 75 to 200 acres of high quality foraging habitat. And what we would consider to be high quality foraging habitat is mature, longleaf pine, well spaced, open midstory. They do not like how hardwoods grow up in the midstory. If they happen to do that, that might be one reason why you would find a cavity so high up, like I described earlier, about 90 feet. And kind of a lush ground cover. That's where most of these insects begin, and then they make their way up the boles of the trees for the RCW to eat. So in order to maintain this habitat, prescribed fire is the best way to do that. And it's essential for a mature, healthy longleaf pine ecosystem for many reasons. One of the most important ones is that longleaf pine seeds need a kind of a bare patch of ground in order to germinate, and the fire helps provide that. So I mentioned this idea of helpers in the previous slide. And these are typically young males, offspring from a previous breeding season, that remain with the group to help raise subsequent broods of their siblings and help defend the territory. Females, on the other hand, are much more likely to leave in search of a new group. So kind of an easy way to remember that is young males stay and females fly away. Young males may also choose to leave and venture out and find their own group and sort of start their own family from scratch. But there is a risk of not being able to find a territory or a cavity tree, and this would result in them becoming what we call a floater, which is not really a good situation to be in. And because cabbage trees take so long to excavate, that is a very limiting issue for them for dispersing. What happens more often with males, at least, is that they'll stay in the group, and once the main breeder, their father, passes away, one of the helpers will step up and inherit the territory. If its biological mother is still in the group, he will essentially force her out. She'll go off and look for a new territory, and that male will become the new breeding male for that group. So we mentioned something about just a bird's ability to disperse. Typically, birds are gonna go out and venture if they leave their natal site, and they'll move. They'll find a new territory, typically within 7 kilometers from where they were born. They will, however, go out up to 30 kilometers away, searching for that. And there's been at least one, maybe more, reported cases of birds flying over 287 kilometers to find a new breeding territory. With all of these situations, one really important thing for them is this fragmentation of habitat, or gaps. If a bird's moving through a forest and it finds a gap bigger than 600 meters, that's a barrier for them. So they're gonna have to find a way to get around it. And if they can't find a way to get around it, then they've essentially reached the limit of as far as they can go. That's kind of a good lead into why are they endangered now? And there's 3 main reasons. The first, which surely shouldn't come as much of a surprise, is this lack of cavities from mature pine trees. Second is habitat loss and fragmentation, and its effects on their ability to find suitable foraging habitat and grow their populations. And this is a result of many different things, from increases in development, hurricane damage, land use changes, converting forest to agriculture, and fire suppression is another big one. And lastly, small isolated populations and the effects that this has on genetic variation, dispersal, and connectivity to support population growth. So as we know now, RCW are heavily tied to longleaf pine. There's strong evidence that prior to European settlement of North America, there was about 92 million acres of longleaf pine in southeastern United States, and this has decreased dramatically ever since. This map is more current. I'm not sure exactly when it was published, but you can see by the sort of the darker shaded areas that this is where longleaf pine that are 40 years old currently occur. So a big reduction in that, and 40-year-old trees is still pretty young as far as an RCW. They like them, upwards to 80 to 90 years old. So this would still even be limiting for them. Zooming in a little bit closer here to home, North Carolina. Again, this is a historic range of longleaf pine in North Carolina, and this is current. This is actually as of 2001, so it is a little dated, but still, this is, I think, a good representation of where longleaf pine is in North Carolina currently. So how many RCW did we once have in North America, and how many are there today? So, nobody was monitoring RCWs back during pre-colonial times. So, but based on the fact that we have evidence of that 92 million acres and roughly, how much habitat each group needs, we have a pretty reliable estimate of anywhere from 900,000 to 1.5 million groups. But as the human population grew, so did timber harvesting and urbanization, agriculture. And by 1970, the RCW population dropped to 3,500 groups, which prompted the Fish and Wildlife Service to list them as endangered. As of 2018, this number has grown to just under 8,000 groups, which has led the Fish and Wildlife Service very recently to recommend their downlisting to a threatened species. So let's kind of talk more specifically about their distribution and population here in North Carolina. During the Fish and Wildlife Service's species status assessment that helped them lead to that decision to downlist them, they introduced a measure of population resiliency. And this describes the ability of a population to withstand random events. So what does that really mean though? And a highly resilient population, they're essentially better able to withstand disturbances such as a reduction in fecundity or birth rates, annual variation in something like rainfall, and effects of some human activities. And based on a number of our criteria, the species status assessment ranked each population as either being very high, high, moderate, low, or very, or having very low resiliency. And so I'll move kind of through some of the main populations here in North Carolina and display their current population numbers, the number of groups, as well as their resiliency rankings. So to start with, the Sandhills of North Carolina, roughly 781 groups, and this population was ranked as having very high resiliency. And so this is by far where we have the most woodpeckers in North Carolina, and one of the biggest populations really in the world. So this is there's been a tremendous amount of effort in that area to help that population, not even just remain stable but grow. Next, Croatan National Forest, 69 groups, and Camp Lejeune, 91 groups. They were ranked as having low resiliency. P3 up in the northeast part of the state, that's Palmetto Pear Tree Preserve. This has come under recent management by the commission. They have 102 groups, and they received a moderate resiliency ranking. And lastly, down in Pender County, Holly Shelter Game Land, 36 groups, and they also received a ranking of low resiliency. So I'd like to talk a little bit about and highlight a project, a collaborative project between the Coastal Land Trust and the Wildlife Resources Commission. This is Gales Creek Preserve at Camp Hatcher. It's a 250-acre site owned by the Land Trust that hosts longleaf pine savanna, and it's bordered to the west by Croatan National Forest and to the east by a 20-acre conservation easement held by the Boy Scouts of America. In August 2014, the commission installed 2 artificial nest boxes at this property. And our reasoning was that because it's in such close proximity to Croatan National Forest, we were hopeful that dispersing birds would be able to find these trees and hopefully help start a new cluster for that area. So this technique requires several steps. First, I need to strap myself to the tree and use a ladder to climb up. We want to get at least a minimum of at least 10 feet, preferably 20. But that just depends on several factors, usually mostly the diameter of where we need to put the insert. And so for this, in this particular case, I was only able to go up 10 feet to have a large enough of an area to put in the insert box. Next, I'm going to scrape off bark where the insert's going to go. That just provides me with a kind of a smooth, clean surface to work with that also reveals that reddish bark underneath that a visiting woodpecker might key in on. I'm going to take my chainsaw and I'm going to create these kind of vertical slices in there, what we call pages. And I'm going to use a kind of a pry bar to peel those out and use a chisel and the saw again to clean up this box and just hollow it out. I'm going to take one of our insert boxes that's pictured here. I'm going to just slide that into that opening, put some putty on it, put wedges in there, hammer them in to make sure along the edges that it's really snug and secure and it's not going to go anywhere. And then lastly, I'll take my chainsaw and create sort of these kind of artificial resin wells just to get sap flowing down from the tree. I'll also use spray paint to simulate, lots of old dried sap. And again, that's just another thing that a bird may sort of passing through the area may key in on, and they'll come and inspect the tree. The best thing about this technique and what has sort of revolutionized the recovery of the woodpecker in many ways is that a bird can begin using it that night. It takes, depending on who's doing it, it can take anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes to install it to maybe an hour or more, but a bird can start using it that day. And so this has really helped us grow populations, and in the event of sort of a catastrophic hurricane, to be able to go in quickly and make sure they got a place to roost that night. So in closing, as Stephanie had mentioned, I administer the state's safe harbor program. This essentially has two main goals. First is to reduce legal uncertainty for private landowners. What has happened in the past, and I'm sure continues today, is that if a property owner has older pine trees on their property and they live in close proximity to where a woodpecker cluster is, a lot of times they'll just cut down the trees so they don't have to worry about the birds moving onto the property and then them having to sort of abide by some of the laws of the Endangered Species Act. And so what this program does is it gives them the assurance that if any new groups move onto their property, or if they already have a group and it expands, that they will be protected and they will not be sort of liable for those accumulated number of birds. And from the Commission's perspective is that because so much private property is owned in North Carolina, we would like to see this at least stabilize groups on private property, or ideally even increase the number of RCW groups. So if you'd like to learn more about this program, this is the web address here, or by all means, feel free to email me at my address if you have any specific questions. And lastly, for those interested in learning more about the proposed downlisting by the Fish and Wildlife Service, here is the website and the docket number that you can use. If you do plan to comment, the sort of closing date for that is December, well, I put December 4th. I think it might be December 7th. So you might want to double check on that, but we've got a little bit of time, but just keep that sort of early December date in mind if you do want to comment. So that's all I have for now. I hope, again, I hope that was informative and you learned something. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, John. That was very informative. I definitely learned some things, and there are questions. Several came through the chat during your talk, so I'd love if we have a couple of minutes. One question from earlier in the talk was, where do they live when they're trying to build a cavity for 6 to 13 years? So where are they if they're not in a cavity already? So can you answer that? Right.
So if there's no cavity at all for them, then they have to essentially roost out in the open. So they'll find a little spot in between a branch and the tree, and they'll just hunker down and try and stay as safe as they can. So that's kind of a worst case scenario. And if they happen to already have a cavity and they're just out building one, say to entice a partner or to provide an extra one for a helper to grow their group, then they'll obviously just return to their own cluster. And there are several cases where you can have multiple cavity chambers within one individual tree. So sometimes, one tree could be 2 or even 3 times as important to, for us to protect and make sure that it's remains healthy.
Okay, good, fair enough. And then a question, when you were talking about the population and the population increasing again, you said it is just under 8,000, but is that individuals, or is that there are 8,000 groups?
Those numbers are groups. So it went from 900,000 to 1.5 million groups, down to 3,500 groups, now up to almost 8,000 groups. So simple math would be multiplying that by 2 for a male and a female at least. So you can double that if you want to get an individual number. But again, there's a lot of helper birds out there, and so it's difficult to get an exact estimate on there.
Okay. 2 people asked the same question. What are the anticipated negative consequences for RCW management and funding from the proposed Fish and Wildlife Service downlisting?
That's a good question. It's a fair one. I don't know if I can answer that. It's somewhat of a hypothetical. Where as an agency, we're still committed to managing populations on our property and the habitat on our property essentially in perpetuity. I mean, that's one of our main goals, and not just for RCW, but for that ecosystem as a whole. And you know, but budget considerations, there's any number of things that can impact that. I think being downlisted, I think we're still going to see a lot of support from the service to help manage these birds. But we're, you know, as an agency, we're discussing sort of our response and comments to this decision, and I'm sure that will be something that we'll sort of bring up in those discussions.
Okay. I know you have something you need to get to next, but do you have time for one more, or do you need to rock and roll?
No, I think I could do one more, yeah.
Okay, so why is the resilience of mid-coast groups less than those in the Sandhills in the Northeast?
That's a great question. So I would say, I was a little surprised that the P3 population got a moderate ranking. You know, a lot of this is done with statistical modeling, which is not the easiest thing to sort of understand, but I would say the biggest factor impacting those groups and populations is their proximity to the coast and hurricanes. A hurricane can come through and wipe out, you know, a whole population, maybe even more than one. I think, you know, we saw tremendous damage with Hurricane Michael just a couple of years ago, and then even older hurricanes that impacted places like Francis Marion National Forest in South Carolina. So those populations are just, they're exposed, and so I think that factored in pretty heavily to them getting a lower rank.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, I think that we are just about out of time for John today. Thank you so very much for being with us. Definitely an informative talk. We will be posting a recording of this talk on our Facebook page, not Facebook, our website. But I did want to mention, if you are curious, further curious about the down listing of the RCW, our friends at the Audubon Cape Fear are going to be hosting a talk about the red-cockaded woodpecker on November 17th. Van, maybe you've already done it, but you want to pop the Audubon URL into the chat as well. You can find more information about that talk if you'd like to attend. I believe that is free and open to the public, but check my facts online. I did want to mention that we have, I'm just beyond delighted. We have talks scheduled through January 8th for the Little Lunch Lecture. So we are going to just keep rocking and rolling, but I do want to mention we will be off November 27th, right after Thanksgiving, and then we'll be off Christmas Day and New Year's Day. I know you'll be so disappointed to not spend those holidays with us, but we will have Sam Cook with us here next week, November the 6th, to talk about forest management at NC State's 10 forest assets. And then on November 13th, Joel Cook will present Reeves Chapel, a community conservation story, among the whole list, which you can find on our website. I'll only mention those two upcoming ones, but we really do look forward to having you back with us. Thanks again for being here today. Have a fabulous weekend. It's gorgeous. Well, it's gorgeous in Wilmington. Hope it's gorgeous where you are. So
thank you, John.
Thanks again, John.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yep, we'll see everybody next week. Bye.
Bye.